Thank you, Chairman Winstrup. Assistant Secretary Egoran, we've heard a lot of excuses as to why HHS has not provided documents repeatedly requested by this subcommittee, and we've heard lots of empty claims that you and your team are doing everything you can to cooperate with our request. In your testimony, you state that HHS has produced more than 10,000 pages of documents in response to this subcommittee's oversight request. However, that's not entirely true. The documents that your department has provided this subcommittee included hundreds of publicly available news articles, not even authored by HHS officials. To make matters worse, the documents that are actually from HHS are heavily redacted or don't have anything to do with the topic at hand. It is evident that you or your team are simply trying to wait out the existence of the subcommittee and are using every possible tactic to seem prompt and responsive when in reality you are stonewalling and interfering with this investigation. Your inability to provide the pertinent information is either deliberate or it is complete incompetence. And you have mentioned that you have 90,000 employees available to you, and I would suspect that you would have a cadre of people that could get together and provide us pertinent information related to these questions. My first question is, on August 2nd, 2023, this subcommittee sent the department a letter regarding a potential new guideline on COVID-19 booster shots. Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent that this August 2nd letter from last year be entered into the record for the purposes of this hearing.
Without objection.
Assistant Secretary Egoran, the committee simply wanted to review the science and the supported statements made by the CDC director to the media regarding the boosters. However, no response and no documents have been received after sending this letter. Were you aware that this letter was sent to Dr. Mandy Cohen, the director of the CDC?
Congressman, I am aware that letter was sent to Director Cohen. I'm also aware that there was a briefing based on that letter providing information to staff within a month of us receiving that letter.
Did you identify points of contact in the CDC to get us a written response to this?
Congressman, we provided a briefing to the staff, and based on the prioritization, we have continued to work on other priorities of the subcommittee.
Did you ever intend to send any documents that we've requested regarding the CDC booster guidance?
Congressman, we continue to work on productions across all of the inquiries.
How many documents have you provided so far regarding this topic?
Concerning that topic, we have provided a briefing. We have provided.
How many documents have you provided? As this was a request for documents.
Congressman, we have provided a briefing with the information. If there
How many
is
documents?
follow-up, we are happy to work with you.
This is not a follow-up. This is something we've already requested. We've already requested documents. We didn't request a briefing to explain why we can't have the documents.
Congressman, it was not a briefing to explain why we could not have the documents. It was a briefing to provide the information and to help.
But were the documents provided?
Congressman, if we are happy to work with the staff.
So the answer is no. You did not provide the documents that we requested. You still have not provided those documents. Over the course of this hearing, it's apparent that HHS has willfully ignored direct requests from this subcommittee and deliberately sent documents that are intended to obscure the truth rather than uncover it. You know, I just hope that we get ourselves in a situation pretty soon here as members of Congress where we can do something to make you take the oversight of Congress seriously. I hope that we can find a way to restrict your travel funds, to restrict your pay, to fence off some money to your organization. We're going to have to do something drastic. It's apparent that you have thumbed your nose, your organization has thumbed your nose at this committee with regards to the oversight responsibility that we have, and you've done everything you can to make a joke of our oversight. So I hope that your attitude will change. I hope that we can get more response from your organization when we ask for stuff that we need for oversight as a bipartisan committee to answer the questions. We can't even get to the point where we answer the questions or we have a debate between the two sides here, between the Democrats and the Republicans on the issues that are the topics of these committee hearings that we're having. If we can't get the information in order to support that, and this is just an obvious attempt to stop that process. With that, I yield back my time.
Here now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. General Brown, it's great to see you again, sir. Always enjoy having a Texan here in committee before us, especially one that's spent time out in West Texas. Secretary Austin and General Brown, would you both please answer the following questions as briefly as possible? From your perspective, what is the role of Special Operations Forces in the Department of Defense?
Special Operations Forces are clearly a remarkable advantage for us, a remarkable asset. They add value in every endeavor, and you know, they're very difficult to train and equip in terms of the amount of time that it takes. And so, but having said that, they provide value in a number of ways, and so we treasure their contributions.
In the interest of time, General Brown, you agree with that?
I do.
Okay. When you think about a conflict in the Indo-Pacific, is there a unique role that Special Operations Forces might play there? You get both, either one of you, both of you?
Yes, there is a unique
Okay,
role.
thank you. I appreciate that. More broadly, are there still threats to American interest in the Middle East and Africa from our adversaries?
Yes.
Okay.
If you certainly consider the transnational terrorist threat an adversary, certainly.
Yes, sir. Okay, and is it fair to assume that Special Forces might be utilized to conduct operations in CENTCOM, AFRICOM, and INDOPACOM at some point in the near future?
Yes.
General, you agree?
Yes, and I would say not only Special Operations Forces, but pretty much all of our joint force can be expect to be engaged in various forms, depending on what the threat or what the situation is.
Thank you. Would you both agree that Special Operations Forces are a critical component of any of our plans in order to be successful against our adversaries, our prime adversaries in these areas?
Yes, I would.
Yeah, yes, they are, and one of several critical components.
Thank you. Would you both say that generally the demand signal for Special Operations Forces is extremely high right now?
It is high, and it's a small force, so it's a high demand, low density resource.
Thank you.
I mean, I would agree, but I would say the demand signal has changed because the environment's changed a bit, particularly in the.
Okay. And do you both think that that our Special Operations Forces are more capable than their Chinese, Russian, or Iranian counterparts?
I would tell you that our Special Operations Forces are the best in the world.
Yes, sir. I agree. Same, General. All
I
right.
agree.
Do you believe that our Special Operations Forces provide our military with an advantage over our adversaries?
They do. Certainly working in conjunction with conventional forces, they absolutely do.
They do.
Okay. Personally, I believe that our special forces, like you stated, are the most skilled operators in the world and provide one of the greatest advantages when we look at possible future conflicts. Unfortunately, there are proposals out there that right now that are looking to cut thousands of personnel from special operations community, and I personally believe that this is a huge mistake. I understand the budget realities that we're facing, but if we're going to be looking for ways to pay the bills in the department, surely we can find better options out there than intentionally degrading our special operations capability. I would urge each of you and my colleagues here on the committee that cutting special operations is not the answer, that we need to ensure that our special operations forces capability is adequately resourced and supported. So I just wanted to go on the record saying that. One more quick question. The Texas Panhandle is home to the Pantex plant in the United States, which is the only nuclear weapons assembly and disassembly facility. Most people don't know this, but the Department of Defense relies heavily on the National Nuclear Security Administration and the Department of Energy to provide the nuclear portion of our nuclear weapons. However, I'm constantly concerned that the administration does not share the urgency that each of us here in this room do with regards to nuclear modernization. At the Pantex plant, a Department of Energy facility where critical work is done to modernize the nuclear triad, there's currently work being done on the buildings that were built in the 1940s where the ceiling is literally crumbling. My concern on this is more with the National Nuclear Security Administration because the Department of Defense has been firmly committed to nuclear modernization from everything I'm told and I've seen. But we need our entire national security apparatus to be on the same page and working together. To that point, this year, the National Security Administration requested $0 for 2 key mission-enabling construction projects at Pantex, including the new analytic gas lab to replace the current one that was built in 1945. We spend all of our time talking about modernization and quality of life issues, but there appears to be somewhat of a disconnect between the Department of Defense and the rest of the executive branch when it comes to these key investments for nuclear modernization. So I'm running out of time here. I just want to make sure that I got on the record saying that. I hope that you guys can continue to support us and work with those other
Gentleman's
organizations.
time's expired.
You ever removed from
Yes,
the
thank you.
chambers?
Yes,
Ever removed?
please.
Excuse me, I asked the Capitol Police to escort.
Yep, thank you. She can be removed. Yeah, you can be removed. Actually, you're not allowed to speak.
Your time has
Take your
expired.
Starbucks with you.
Mr. Garcia, Mr. Raskin, you're out of line. Your times have expired. Now recognize Dr. Jackson from Texas for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Fauci, I have to say, I, as so many Americans, am deeply disappointed in your actions during a critical time in our nation's history while you were in key leadership roles as the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease and as the chief medical advisor to President Biden. Put quite simply, you failed miserably, in my opinion. Based on all we have learned during the pandemic and all that we have since learned through this committee's work, I believe your failures stem from both an effort of self-preservation, manifested by a series of lies and cover-up, and by a total failure of leadership. It was obvious to everyone that you and your organization, NIH, had a lot to lose if the American people were to discover that COVID-19 was most likely leaked from a lab in Wuhan, China, and that you, via EcoHealth Alliance and Peter Daszak, actually funded this research, and that this lab was actively and recklessly conducting gain-of-function research. As such, you did everything in your power to deflect and cover up this possibility. You even recruited others to help you in this effort. Unfortunately, this cost our country and the world valuable time that may have led to answers regarding the origin, may have blunted the spread, and would have almost certainly saved lives. While I think most of us have known all along what I just described, what I have been appalled to discover through sworn testimony to this committee is the level at which you and those that worked for you went to cover up the obvious. Just a few examples, and I know these have been touched on, but they're important for everyone to hear. Dr. Lawrence Tabak, former acting director of NIH, testified that under the generic definition that NIH did in fact fund gain-of-function research. This was based on a definition that was initially used by NIH and a definition that was abandoned and removed from the website in October of 2021 and replaced by a new, much more detailed definition with a much higher bar that you have since conveniently used to define gain-of-function testing and to deny what Dr. Tabak has since confirmed. He also said that EcoHealth Alliance failed to properly and promptly report that their research violated the terms of the grant, something that went completely unaddressed under your watch. Dr. Morans, your senior advisor, who you have tried today to distance yourself from, but whose large volume of emails clearly demonstrate that you had a very close and personal relationship with, and who reported to you directly, has openly bragged about how he subverted FOIA requests. I remind you that the law requires you and your former organization to comply with Freedom of Information Act requests. It is not optional. If you or your employees or your organization that you oversaw were systemically avoiding transparency and illegally hiding or destroying documents that rightfully belong to the American people, then you should be criminally charged, and they should as well. In addition, Dr. Gregory Folkers, your chief of staff, also engaged in illegal practices in which he crafted messages using symbols instead of letters to avoid FOIA exposure. In an email, April 2020, from Dr. Morans to Peter Daszak, he says, quote, "There are things I can't say." Well, I wonder what he couldn't say. He also went on to say, quote, "Except Tony is aware, and I have learned there are ongoing efforts within NIH to steer through this with minimal damage to you, Peter, and colleagues, and to NIH and NAID," end quote. And then a few days later, he said, quote, "I have reason to believe that there are already efforts going on to protect you," end quote. In February of 2021, Dr. Morans wrote to Boston University scientist Gerald Kirsch saying, quote, "I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear after I'm FOIA'd, but before the search starts. So I think we are all safe," end quote. Dr. Fauci, I want to know what you were being protected from and what you needed to be safe from. I'm going to go on because I have a little time here. He went on to say, quote, "Plus, I deleted most of the earlier emails after sending to Gmail. Once again, illegal and an actual crime." Dr. Morans noted in another email to Dr. Kirsch saying, quote, I learned the tricks last year from an old friend, Marge Moore, who heads our FOIA office and also hates FOIAs," end quote. It is absolutely amazing to me that Dr. Morans and Marge Moore still have jobs and our taxpayers are still paying their salaries. Dr. Morans wrote to Dr. Daszak in April of 2021, quote, "P.S. I forgot to say there is no worry about FOIAs. I can either send stuff to Tony on his private email or hand it to him to work or at his house. He is too smart to let colleagues send him stuff that could cause trouble." End quote. Apparently, you neglected to surround yourself with equally smart individuals. Dr. Morans wrote to another collaborator, Peter Hotitz, in June 2021, at Baylor College of Medicine that he had deleted all his emails related to COVID origin when, quote, the shit hit the fan, end quote. He said, quote, I feel pretty sure Tony were too. The best way to avoid FOIA hassles is to delete all emails when you learn the subject is pretty sensitive. In October 2021, Dr. Morans wrote to Peter Daszak, quote, Peter, from Tony's numerous recent comments to me and from what Francis has been vocal about over the past 5 years, we are trying to protect you, and they are protecting their own reputations as well, end quote. I'll just jump ahead. The American people can rest assured that we are going to continue to pursue answers and we continue to push for full accountability from you and your colleagues despite continuing efforts to try to cover this up. Dr. Fauci, history will not be kind to you and you will be known as the man who put his personal interest before the interest of the American people, the very people that you were supposed to be protecting. Your actions, along with several others we have had before this committee, have completely eroded America's trust in our public health system and the agency that you represented for half a century. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Takuda from Hawaii for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope I'll have an additional 30 seconds like the previous gentleman. And Dr. Fauci,
I have allowed that today.
Thank you.
Just for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this important hearing today and the opportunity to hold former Governor Cuomo accountable for what I consider as egregious actions taken during the coronavirus pandemic, which led to the unnecessary deaths of thousands of American citizens. Mr. Cuomo, what demographic or group of people are at the greatest risk of death from COVID?
Immunocompromised, senior citizens, what we saw at Kirkland Hospital, Seattle,
right.
Washington, as the first experience.
That's right. COVID in particular, it was the elderly and those with comorbidities. The exact population, unfortunately, that occupies every nursing home in this country. Despite that basic medical reality, your administration mandated that nursing homes accept COVID-positive patients, and I've heard you say that they didn't mandate it, but they did. It says, no, it says here, this is the directive, I have it in my hand, it says, no resident shall be denied readmission or admission to the nursing home solely based on confirmed or suspected diagnosis of COVID-19. So your assertion that the nursing home had the ability to turn these patients away is absolutely incorrect based on this. They did not have the ability to do that. They could not turn them away. By doing this, you sentenced many of the residents there to death because these residents that were in the nursing home that didn't have COVID, that were immunocompromised, that had comorbidities, that were elderly, were destined to get COVID at that particular point when you're bringing known COVID-positive patients into the hospital. Even if you prohibited patients prior to admission, which would have been, you didn't allow them to test them. And that would have been key in deciding who was going to get quarantined and who wasn't going to get quarantined. It says in here that they can't be tested prior to admission. That's crazy. If you're admitting a patient and you can't test them, you don't know what to do with them when you get them. It ignores the fact that they were allowed to go there even if they were known to have COVID. But I submit to you that your claim that the nursing home staff brought this in to the nursing home is completely false. You claim that the nursing home staff was responsible for the deaths, that they brought it into the facilities. Well, perhaps there were instances of that. Maybe there were. But I can promise you that if you are directing patients with known COVID to be admitted, you no longer need to be asking the question of how COVID got into the facility. You introduced it at that point. It does not matter if staff are bringing it in or not. If you're allowing and mandating that COVID-positive patients be admitted to the nursing home, that is how it's getting in the nursing home, that's how it's spreading, and that's how it's killing other residents. Anyone that gave you the advice on this directive should be held accountable right along beside you. Anyone that was participating in that. In particular, Dr. Howard Zucker and Nurse Sally Dreslin, your DOH commissioner and deputy commissioner, should, in my opinion, have their medical license taken away and never have anything to do with the practice of medicine again based on their advice on this letter to you that the three of you are on the top of this letter having endorsed.
Doctor, if I may, it said you cannot solely refuse a person based on the diagnosis, which is the same thing the CMS CDC said.
Who cares if they're diagnosed with COVID? What does it matter? You're saying, well, maybe you can't say it's because they have diabetes.
No,
it has to be.
You can say I can't take care of them. I can't take care of them. A nursing home had total discretion. I didn't have.
So they would have to,
based
if they had a
precautions.
patient that was coming from the hospital that was diagnosed as positive for COVID, and they had no other medical issues, and they were medically stable, which, by the way, has nothing to do with whether they're infectious or not, then you could, the nursing home could turn them away at that particular point. That's not what the letter says. The letter says that they have to take
I
them.
know, Doctor, the advisory does not supersede the law. The law is very clear. The Attorney General said the law was in place. A nursing home shall only accept people for whom they can provide adequate care as determined by the nursing home. So if the nursing home says, I can't quarantine this person who may have COVID, that's it.
No, but that's not what it says here. It specifically says that if they have COVID and that's all they have, they can't use that as a reason to not admit them. They have to admit them. That's what this letter says.
No, it says you can't solely not admit them because of COVID-19, but you can say, I can't take care of them. I don't have the precautions.
What's the difference? If you can't take care of them, you can't admit them.
That's right, and you don't admit
But that's
them.
it says you can't not admit them. You have to admit them. You're saying, oh, but if we can't take care of them, you don't have to admit them. That's not what it says.
CMS CDC says you can accept a COVID positive person if you can take care of them.
That's not what this says.
This says you can't say no just because they have COVID-19, but you can say, I can't take care of them. I have no quarantine.
So
It's
what if they
totally up
say,
to the
I
nursing
can't
home.
take care of them because they have COVID-19? They can't do that, according to
Yes,
this
they
letter.
can.
No, they
Totally.
can't. Look, and I agree with my colleague here, Ms. Green, that you had a perfect opportunity to put many of these patients into a safe environment on the hospital ship that had 1,000 beds that was left New York after not being used and being used less than 190 times. It could have been there. You could have put them all there, and you could have saved a lot of lives, but you didn't too.
Now
Except
recognized,
except the
gentleman's time
COVID-19
has
wouldn't
expired.
accept COVID
I now
positive
recognize
people.
Dr.
Okay.
McCormick from Georgia for 5 minutes of questions.
Well, that's the fact.